Ladies and gentlemen, Twitter continues its slide primarily from banning President Trump and from alienating 74 million supporters of President Trump and just basically suppressing any thought or any dialogue or any discussion it deems inappropriate. Now, if they engaged in a standard of logic or reasoning that they also apply to Democrats and liberals, that would be fine. If they're suspending or banning left-leaning politicians for making false claims or for heated rhetoric, that would be okay. But they don't do that. There are about 6 to 7 examples of Democratic Party politicians who have stated worse things than President Trump, and President Trump, through his words, did not compel anyone to commit any egregious act. How do we know this? Because the mayor of D.C. and the attorney general of D.C. are not going after Trump in a court of law. Nobody is, actually. The reason they're not going after President Trump in a court of law is because they would be laughed out of court. You know that phrase that Democrats love to use? You were laughed out of court. Well, they would have been laughed out of court had they gone after Trump in a court of law. That's why they're going through impeachment. Because impeachment, they didn't impeach President Trump on a crime. They didn't impeach President Trump on a crime in 2018 or 2019. So they're saying that he committed a crime this time around, but they're not going. I mean, they can go after him in a court of law. So the Mueller probe found nothing. Did not find that. They didn't even say he obstructed justice. The Mueller probe. So the whole thing, like with President Trump, everything they do, everything they say is pure hyperbole, heated rhetoric. And yet, he didn't work with Russia. How many false and misleading statements were made without any warranty, without any disclaimers saying this is a disputed claim against Trump? They utilized a Steele dossier against Trump. And yet the New York Post's account was suspended for like 2 weeks prior to the election. But hit subscribe to this channel. This is actually a really huge story. Twitter still facing the fallout from banning Trump. Here's the latest call from Wall Street Barons by Max A. Cherney. And so this is the second consecutive day the stock slid, but here a day after, demonstrators picketed over barring. A day after a single demonstrator picketed Twitter's empty San Francisco headquarters over barring President Donald Trump from the platform, Wall Street continues to weigh in on what it means for the stock. Potentially unlike other social networks such as Facebook, Twitter has exposed itself to a significant financial risk by blocking Trump's account and removing his tweets. Shares fell for the 5th consecutive day on Tuesday. So it's been, about 4? I think it was even tanking before they banned President Trump. But I told you, even before they banned President Trump, that they were going to experience some serious financial issues in the short term. And then I told you, right when they did, they're going to basically, in about 3 to 4 years, this company will go bankrupt. Now, I feel bad for the employees, but that's pretty much the case. And I feel bad for people who invested in the company, stockholders, but that's the case. This is a company with no long-term there's no long-term business model. 80% of the revenues are from advertising. Who's going to want to advertise on a platform that's just a boiling cauldron of negativity in some kind of cyber reality that suspends thought and dialogue and discourse arbitrarily, like completely arbitrarily? But here, the stock has declined 12% since the events last week. The financial risk is related to Trump's big audience on the platform. The president began his term in office with roughly 15 million followers, which swelled to nearly 90 million the time Twitter banned the account. Rosenblatt Securities explained the issue in a note to clients. In short, Trump's 88 million followers on the platform generate an enormous amount of engagement on both sides of the political aisle. All that helps to sell ads. The investment firm wrote that Trump account receives an average of 4 million mentions a day, which spiked to 16 million mentions 2 days before the suspension. They estimate about 30 million of those followers are daily Twitter users. Without the engagement with the Trump account, the company risks jettisoning between 6 to 9 million Twitter members who use the site every day, a loss that will cost Twitter. While acknowledging that the calculation is not an exact science, the analysts' team now models full year 2021 ad sales as 3.28 billion, well below the consensus estimate of 3.83 billion. And that's also they have 3.43 billion in debt. How are they going to grow? And that's just revenue. That's just revenue. Their operating expenses are through the roof. So, and they lost money in the first quarter, lost money in the second quarter. They've only had 2 profitable years. This year, they'll probably make a small profit relative to the debt that they hold. So, I mean, obviously Dorsey is like, what, a billionaire? There are people who've become millionaires from starting, millionaires many times over from starting Twitter. Okay? But there are people who make millions from failed companies all the time. Detractors of President Trump have said he does the same thing. Okay, but see, just because you make millions upon millions, or just because you're a billionaire because you started a platform that for 6, 7, 8 years grew in relevance, doesn't mean that you've done any good for society. Jack Dorsey and others who run Twitter have opened up a Pandora's box of negativity to the world. The most negative, hurtful, belligerent interactions in cyberspace, on the internet, take place on Twitter. And that's not hyperbole. I deleted my Twitter account 2 years ago. There is still an impersonator. It's breaking the law trying to impersonate me on Twitter. 2 years ago, I deleted my Twitter account. I've been telling people for 2 years. They lost $5 billion the other day just in market value. So how is this company going to grow if it's alienated 74 million Americans? Every conservative out there, even if they don't like Trump, this is what Twitter doesn't understand. And this is what tech doesn't understand. There are conservatives, there are never Trumpers. They know that Twitter's biased. They're not going on the platform either. People who don't like Trump understand that the Trump suspension and permanent ban is a wrong thing. We have something called freedom of speech in this country. If you want to apply the logic to Trump and Trump supporters, you better apply the logic to Democrats and the words that they say, or left-leaning organizations. There was a correlation, maybe not a causation, but there was a correlation between words and heated rhetoric and really horrible things the past 5-6 months prior to the election. How about $1 billion in property loss and insurance claims? 19 lives lost during 5 to 6 months of endless confrontations and clashes between protesters and police. But it was championed. So when they say, oh, well, if left-leaning protesters had been in D.C. that day, in the Capitol, if they had done what Trump supporters did, no. If they had done what Trump supporters did, which I condemn, first of all, I condemn what took place because it was a loss of life which was horrendous. Those 5 people, that woman and those 4 men should be alive today. That the loss of life was horrendous. But it was an absurd idea. There was zero to be gained from it politically, or in terms, there was nothing to be gained. And now in the short term, President Trump and others, Parler. So you have in the short term, Democrats have used this to ban and silence and suppress thought and speech. In the long term, it's going to hurt Democrats. In the short and the long term, it's hurting Twitter. So at the end of the day, it's not going to help the left at all because they're going to go after left-leaning voices. After Trump, people on the far left rejoicing, they're the ones who are going to be silenced. They're not going to be happy then. But what took place in the Capitol was horrendous. Shouldn't have happened. because there was no thought to it. It's like, oh, well, no, you can't. They didn't go in with the intent of losing their lives or causing a life to be lost. But those people should be alive. I feel terrible for the families and the people who've lost loved ones. But if the reverse happened, media would champion it, or they wouldn't be as outraged. And we saw what took place. There was actually a book in defense of that specific activity, or an activity linked to it. In defense of, it's on Amazon. There's a book in defense of committing a certain type of illegal act. It's on Amazon, no problem. And it's written by a liberal or a left-leaning person who believes that this type of activity, or similar, I should say. The name of the book is In Defense of Looting. Okay? And so that's written on the left. So you can see, yeah, if the tables were turned, Democrats would not be as outraged. And they might, and you'd have voices championing what took place. And you better believe that, well, I don't even want to go into it, but I'm saying Democrats for the past 5 to 6 months have witnessed absolute chaos and mayhem on the streets of America, and it's been fiery yet mostly peaceful protests. They have not acknowledged, they've championed, in many cases, the most horrendous acts. And Twitter and other social media platforms not only did nothing about it, but many of these events were organized on Twitter. Twitter in particular, more than Facebook. I'm not a fan of Facebook. I don't have a Facebook account. I deleted my Twitter and Facebook account two years ago. The only good thing about Facebook actually was meeting up with people that you hadn't seen, like contacting or speaking to people that you hadn't spoken to or been in contact with for years and years. That's the only good thing about Facebook. Other than that, nobody needs to know what you ate for dinner, what your cats are doing. There's no point to Facebook. You have, still in this day and age, a phone call, a telephone number is the way to go. If you really care about somebody, call them. Or you can text if you want to. Or you can email a person if you want to. You don't need to dive into this cyber reality where you can, DM somebody, or, you don't need a cyber reality called Twitter, because it's just based on fleeting thoughts, and the company will be a fleeting thought in the history of business. But here, they cautioned that his estimates and analysis don't include non-Trump followers. He lowered the target from 39 to 39 from $40. This is all a lot of this is public relations stuff. And this is what always happens. Before stocks tank, they lower estimates, and they see the long-term growth isn't that robust or profound, and they say, gosh, there's trouble in the long term. Meanwhile, if you do the math, it's not rocket science. They have $3.43 billion in debt. Okay, is the platform growing? No. The platform is not really growing. Is the platform going to grow in the future? Does it have this? Is it something that everybody wants to be on? Is it something that everybody wants to be on now? Okay, no. People believe they need to be. Even and 2 years ago, I said, "Oh my goodness, not being on Twitter might, stifle my voice. My channel grew. We're now approaching 200,000 subscribers. Now, it grew slowly, but it didn't have really much to do because I did a lot of live streams, and I'll continue the live streams. But I did a lot of live streams, which is why the channel kind of, didn't grow as fast. There was a time in 2019 where I only did live streams. That's all I did was live streams. I didn't even do an upload. And people would say, HA, just do one upload at least. But with on YouTube, if you just do only live streams, your channel doesn't move up for some reason. It's the uploads that give you subs. Anyway, so it had nothing to do with Twitter. But people think if you're not on Twitter, you won't get your message across. If you have a website, I have a website, hagoodman.com. You can read my writing there. In the Hill, the Huffington Post, Salon, the Jerusalem Post, the Federalist, the Daily Caller, you could see my debates. I mean, you don't need Twitter because I suggest anyone who supported President Trump or is a conservative, even if you're a never Trumper and you watch this, if you're on the left, the far left, if you're watching this and you don't like Trump, it doesn't matter. If you're anyone other than an apoplectic liberal Democrat, delete your Twitter account because it's going to turn into a bastion, a boiling cauldron, a bubbling pot, or a bubbling cauldron and boiling pot of liberal Democrat angst and frustration and discontent and disdain for humanity. That's it. That's not a good prospect. Usually platforms are for everyone. The internet was used to be like for everybody. Now you better watch what you say at all times. That's why I'm so long-winded. Because there are words I cannot say, and I'm not talking about like words associated with politics. I'm just like words that will the algorithm will pick up and say, okay, he's talking about something that, isn't good, even though I'm not talking about that subject. So instead of a certain word, for example, to say a life lost, I just say a life lost. I don't say that specific word. Now we're going to get into charades, but there's so much suppression of thought, which is why we have this. Now, Democrats utilize Twitter. So it's basically, look, overall, Wall Street isn't very excited about Twitter stock at the moment. Of the 38 analysts that cover the name, 61% have the equivalent of a hold rating and 26% of a buy rating. If you have a buy rating on Twitter, you got problems. Which is why, look, they had a buy rating on Enron. I remember 20 years ago as a financial advisor. So I remember all of these things. They had a buy rating for Enron about like 4 or 5 months before it tanked. I think even closer than that. The mean target for the stock price is $48. Okay, so here's the thing with Twitter. Not even so much Facebook, although Facebook is pretty worthless also. Twitter is a cyber reality where Democrats can pump and spew nonsense pertaining to Trump working with Russia without getting called out. These are baseless claims. There's no disclaimer. Caution, caution. Trump was not urinated on in a Moscow hotel room. It never happened. This is from a dossier purchased by Clinton and elevated by corrupt intelligence officials. Caution. You don't get that. When the laptop story came out, Caligula's computer, Biden's son, you better believe that the New York Post, it was their account was suspended. It wasn't hacked material. That's not true at all. In fact, I think the owner of the computer store is suing Twitter. That wasn't hacked. It was actually Caligula's laptop. But see, the truth is just too, Democrats hide behind the tech billionaires. And so Twitter said, okay, we'll do you another solid. We'll go to bat for you. Yeah, we don't like this story. It's disinformation. The Steele dossier was also disinformation. They didn't apply the same standards, the same terms. They don't utilize the same standard of logic when evaluating a Democratic scandal in the same manner they evaluate a Republican scandal. So Adam Schiff can say Trump and Putin are lovers, and it's fine. You'll never get a disclaimer saying this is hyperbole. But and you will have endless everything from threats to libelous statements against journalists that left-leaning people don't like. On a daily basis, Tim Pool, Andy Ngo, and Ian Miles Chong are three of the best journalists in the country. On a daily basis, You have people going after them on Twitter, and Twitter does nothing. But if it was an NBC or CBS or New York Times or Washington Post journalist, that second Twitter would make sure that, oh my God, look, it's a platform that Democrats have used to promote discontent, distrust, disdain, and undermine November of 2016. They viewed, how many times has Hillary Clinton called Trump an illegitimate president on Twitter? How many times have you had a celebrity make the most salacious or egregious allegations against Trump? It's all fine and dandy, and it's all good if you are spewing negativity or hurtful comments towards Trump or Trump supporters. If you do the same, and you're to the other side, oh my goodness, oh my God, you're compelling people to do bad things. We've had, like I said, 5 to 6 months of over $1 billion in property damage, with buildings set ablaze and CNN saying fiery but peaceful. And notice, like Stephen Colbert and all these people, Jimmy Fallon, why didn't they protest? I wonder why. They didn't because, well, somebody should ask them. I'm not going to put words in their mouth. All the YouTubers that are on the left, $20 million venture capital people, they were protests for 5-6 months. Why weren't they there? Okay, they weren't there very likely because a lot of these protests ended in really, really horrific things taking place. And they didn't want to be a part of it. But they will definitely promote that it was, my goodness, it's the Trump supporters and Trump that are just so unique and horrendous in this time. They've spent 4 years undermining Trump's victory. They've spent 5 to 6 months wreaking havoc on the country where the D.C. mayors of every city had curfews. And now they're outraged over what's taking place, which people have a right to be. The left has a right to be outraged, but if they're truly outraged, they should have been outraged over what they presided over the past 4 years and the past 5 to 6 months. But see, again, there's no discourse or dialogue in our country. There's no digital commons that exists. It's just they kicked Trump out because they want to. This is the funny thing. They kicked Trump off of their platform because they said that he compels people to do bad things. There are, like Maxine Waters herself stated, she wanted people to get in the faces of others. That's a specific phrase. That's like really specific instruction. Twitter didn't care. But what they've done is they've amplified Trump's voice, and they've now tanked their stock. So, I mean, they probably don't care. The people running the company are already multi-millionaires many times over, or a billionaire. So they don't care. They've already made their money. But you couldn't find a worse company to invest in long term. And that's not my opinion only. That's Forbes and Barron's. Or Forbes actually has that in an article title. Give me your thoughts below. Hit subscribe right now. Share this segment ever. I'll be back in a couple